All right, let's talk about something we all need to deal with. At some point, creating some space from people who mess with our peace. Today, we're going to dive into how some ancient spiritual traditions offer a kind of toolkit for setting healthy boundaries. We'll be focusing on a really powerful practice from Islamic spirituality. I mean, come on, we've all been there, right? Maybe it's that neighbor who just drains your energy, or a coworker who's like a walking storm cloud. Or maybe it's just a bad influence you can't seem to shake. It is a completely universal feeling to want and need some healthy distance from people who are just not good for us. And, for centuries, people have turned to spiritual practices to help create exactly those boundaries. So in this explainer, we're going to look at one very specific approach from Islamic spiritual traditions. It's all about managing those difficult relationships and just carving out a more peaceful environment for yourself. So what's the first tool in the spiritual toolkit? Well, it might not be what you think. It's not about some big confrontation or just avoiding the person. Instead, it all begins with an internal practice, a very specific kind of personal prayer that's designed to reshape your whole spiritual environment. This practice is called dua, and I want you to think of it less like a rigid, ritualistic chant and more like a direct, personal conversation. It's basically an appeal for help, for guidance, or for a specific change you need in your life. This whole idea, it's the cornerstone of the entire method. Okay, so now let's get into the nitty-gritty. The sources we've looked at describe a particular method of dua for when the thing you want more than anything is to create some distance from a person who's causing you harm. The key concept here is precision. Instead of just a general, hey, help me out kind of prayer, this practice involves calling on specific divine attributes that are perfectly suited for the problem at hand. Think of it like this. If your pipes burst, you call a plumber, not an electrician, right? This is the same idea. You're calling on the right spiritual specialist for the job. The first name in this formula is al-Mani, which basically translates to the preventer or the hinderer. This is the attribute you call on when you want to stop something negative from happening or to prevent a person's harmful actions from ever reaching you. Next up is el-Gabbar, the compeller. This name is all about an irresistible will, the power to actually force a situation to change. It's what you invoke when something requires a powerful, compelling push to get it to shift. And the third attribute is el-Hakim, the all-wise. Now, this one is absolutely crucial. It frames the entire request within the context of divine wisdom. It's like saying, I want this to happen, but in the best possible way, guided by an ultimate understanding that we, as humans, just don't have. So here's how you put it all together into one really potent prayer. The practice involves reciting these three names in order. Now, the sources do say that a specific verse from the Quran is often recited after each name to amplify its meaning, but the core idea is this powerful combination: prevent, compel, and do it all with wisdom. It creates an incredibly focused spiritual request. But okay, what if the situation feels a bit more urgent? What if you need a resolution and you kind of need it fast? Well, the sources also point to a different formula, one that's all about intensity and persistence, for when you're looking for a quicker result. This method involves repeating a combination of three different divine names a total of 1,189 times. These names translate to the first, the subduer, and the delayer. And that huge number isn't just arbitrary. The whole idea is that it demonstrates your deep focus, your sincerity, and your persistence in making the request. But here's a point that every single source emphasizes like crazy. None of this is about magical incantations. The words themselves are only one part of the equation. Your internal state, your mindset when you're praying, that is considered absolutely essential. So yeah, the takeaway here is preparation. For a prayer to really be effective, sources like the Turkish Diyanet say certain conditions should be met. It's like a 5-step process. It begins with self-reflection and repentance. Then you start with praise, not just demands. The prayer has to come from a place of genuine sincerity. You have to be persistent and patient. And finally, you have to hold both hope that you'll be heard and a deep reverence for the divine. And this brings us to a bigger idea. These practices aren't just about targeting one negative person. They're actually part of a larger concept of ongoing spiritual well-being and, protection. You can think of this as two different spiritual strategies. First, there's targeted removal. That's the precise prayer aimed at solving a problem with a specific person. But then there's general protection, a broader practice of building a kind of preventative shield to maintain your peace against any potential harm. It's the difference between pulling one annoying weed and tending to your entire garden. And here's a common prayer that's used for that general protection. The sources say it's traditionally recited 3 times in the morning and 3 times in the evening. The whole intention is to create a constant state of spiritual safety, basically warding off unforeseen troubles before they can even get started. Okay, let's just step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture. What does this really structured approach to managing difficult relationships actually tell us? Well, when you put it all together, a really clear system starts to emerge. You've got specific tools for acute problems like creating distance. You have a required mindset of sincerity to make sure the practice is meaningful. And then you have ongoing habits like protective verses for long-term spiritual maintenance. It's really a holistic approach to actively managing your own personal peace. And this right here is the key takeaway. The sources do not frame this as a spiritual attack or some kind of curse. The underlying intention that's described is purely one of self-preservation. It's all about taking control of your own peace, protecting your tranquility, and establishing a healthy spiritual boundary exactly where one is needed. Ultimately, this whole deep dive into one specific spiritual tradition leads us to a really universal question. Whether it's through prayer, meditation, therapy, or just direct communication, the need to create space for our own well-being is fundamental. So it leaves us all with something to think about. What tools do we use? Or maybe what tools could we use to build the healthy boundaries that we all need to thrive?